The old pickup truck groaned, protesting the final steep climb. Rain, a constant companion in this corner of the Pacific Northwest, slicked the narrow track that snaked through a wall of ancient firs. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, the silence inside the cab thick with the weight of miles and unspoken grief. Blackwood Manor. The name itself felt like a sigh, heavy with damp earth and forgotten things. I'd inherited it, along with a mountain of questions and a gnawing unease after my great-aunt Elara's sudden quiet passing. The estate was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to bury the echoes of my own personal tragedy under layers of dust and solitude. The trees finally thinned, giving way to a ragged lawn choked with ferns and wild rhododendrons. And there it was. It was magnificent, in a decaying, defiant way. I killed the engine, the sudden quiet deafening. The air tasted of pine needles, wet soil, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like old pennies, mixed with a rich, decaying sweetness. I grabbed my duffel bag, the only luggage I'd bothered with, and stepped out onto the gravel drive. The massive oak front door, warped and scarred by decades of weather, groaned a protest as I pushed it open. A cloud of ancient dust motes, disturbed by the sudden light, danced in the sliver of afternoon sun that pierced the gloom. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, but it was unsettling, like a perfume worn by something long dead. Cobwebs hung like tattered banners from the towering ceilings, and a massive chandelier, its crystals coated in grime, dangled precariously above. Elara had been a botanist, a recluse, and clearly not much for housekeeping. I imagined her, a tiny, formidable woman flitting through these vast rooms, her mind lost in the mysteries of roots and soil. There was an old, faded portrait of her on the wall, her eyes sharp and distant, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. She looked like someone who kept secrets. My exploration began on the main floor. The drawing room was a mausoleum of draped furniture, the dining room table a silent testament to meals never eaten. In the library, shelves sagged under the weight of countless leather-bound volumes, many on botany, others on obscure natural histories. I pulled one out, its pages stiff and brittle, revealing intricate, hand-drawn illustrations of plants I'd never seen, their forms unsettlingly organic, almost fleshy. As I moved deeper into the house, the atmosphere shifted. The general air of decay began to feel less like benign neglect and more like a deliberate, creeping presence. I heard faint creaks from the floorboards above me, though I was certain I was alone. A gentle, persistent hum seemed to emanate from the very walls, a low thrumming that I initially dismissed as the wind, but it felt too internal, too rhythmic. The sweet, sickly smell intensified as I ventured into a less used wing, a warren of service corridors and pantries off the main kitchen. I pushed open a heavy, unmarked door, hidden behind what looked like an old linen press. It led to a narrow, descending stone staircase, the kind you'd expect to find in a medieval fortress, not a grand manor. The air here was frigid, still, and held an almost metallic tang, overlaid with the pervasive sweet decay. The walls were rough-hewn stone, wet with condensation, and the ceiling dripped intermittently. Then I saw it. The corridor wasn't just a passage. It was lined with heavy riveted steel doors, each one fitted with a small barred viewport. They were old, incredibly old, but their purpose was unmistakable. My breath hitched. This was an old death row corridor marked for closure. The phrase sprang unbidden to my mind, an echo from some forgotten true crime documentary. Yet here it was, in the bowels of Blackwood Manor. The doors were sealed tight, but the sheer weight of their implied history pressed down on me. I shone the light through one of the viewports, something organic. They pulsed faintly, catching the light in a slick, almost iridescent sheen. The sweet, sickly smell was strongest here, a cloying, potent perfume that made my stomach clench. This wasn't just dust and memories. This wasn't just an eccentric great-aunt's sprawling estate. He was tending something else. And whatever it was, it felt like it had just woken up. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, the silence inside the cab thick with the weight of memories and the heavier weight of Elara's absence. When the massive wrought iron gates finally loomed into view, choked with ivy and rust, I felt a tremor that had nothing to do with the engine's rumble. Blackwood Manor. The manor itself was a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky, more Gothic fortress than country estate. Turrets bristled, chimneys stood like sentinels, and the windows, dark and vacant, seemed to watch my approach. It was like too many flowers left too long in a closed room. The first few days were a blur of unpacking boxes, sweeping away decades of dust, and trying to orient myself within the labyrinthine halls. Each floorboard creaked a different note. Each gust of wind through a loose pane whistled a different tune. I told myself it was just an old house settling, singing its ancient song. But sometimes, in the dead quiet of the night, when the rain lashed against the windows and the wind moaned like a lost soul, I heard things that didn't quite fit. Never distinct, never quite loud enough to make out words, but always there, just beyond comprehension. One afternoon, driven by a need to understand the manor's true scale, and perhaps to escape the insidious feeling of being observed, I decided to explore the deeper, less used sections. Elara's papers, haphazardly stuffed into a mahogany desk, hinted at a vast network of service tunnels and forgotten wings. The air grew heavy, smelling of damp earth and something else, something metallic and stale, like old blood. I pushed through a heavy, unlatched door, descending a flight of stone steps into absolute blackness. My phone light cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow, windowless passage. The walls were rough-hewn stone, scarred with strange etchings I couldn't quite decipher in the weak light. I backed away slowly, the heavy door thudding shut behind me with a finality that made me jump. Shaken, I needed air, light, anything to dispel the clinging gloom of that corridor. I remembered Elara's love for her plants, her eccentric greenhouse, and sought refuge in the thought of green life. I knew the conservatory was somewhere on the west side of the manor, a colossal structure of glass and iron. After a few wrong turns through dusty parlors and forgotten libraries, I found it. A vast arched doorway, draped in thick, cloying vines, led into a humid, verdant expanse. The conservatory was enormous, a cathedral of glass that swallowed the weak afternoon light and filtered it into a hazy emerald glow. It was a place of unsettling beauty. Here, Elara's peculiar tastes had truly flourished, unchecked. Some had tendrils as thick as my arm, snaking across the glass ceiling, dripping moisture. Others bore fleshy, bulbous growths that pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if with a sluggish heartbeat. A soft, rhythmic thump-thump echoed from the deepest part of the conservatory, a sound that seemed to resonate in my chest. It wasn't a mechanical sound, nor the natural creak of a greenhouse. It was organic, deliberate. I took a step forward, drawn by a morbid curiosity. The path narrowed, overgrown with thick, spongy moss and roots that writhed like buried snakes. The light grew dimmer, swallowed by the dense canopy above. The thump-thump grew louder, more insistent. It was unlike any flower I had ever seen, its petals a deep, velvety black, unfurling slowly to reveal a glistening crimson interior. And from its heart, a faint rhythmic pulse emanated, matching the thump-thump that filled the air. As I watched, mesmerized and horrified, one of the thick vine-like tendrils connected to the bloom twitched ever so slightly, and then slowly, deliberately, began to uncoil, reaching out into the humid air as if searching. This wasn't just a garden. This was something else entirely, something alive. And it was awake. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, the silence inside the cab thick with the weight of my decision to come here. Blackwood Manor. It stood, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky, more monument than home. I cut the engine, and the sudden quiet was heavy, punctuated only by the drip of water from the trees and the faint, distant roar of the ocean. It didn't feel welcoming, but then, I wasn't looking for welcome. I was looking for an end to the search, perhaps. A place to simply be. Dust motes danced in the sparse light filtering through grimy panes, disturbed by my every step. The silence was profound, broken only by the creak of the old floorboards beneath my boots. I walked through the cavernous foyer, past shrouded furniture that looked like sleeping giants, and into what I presumed was the main living area. It was all heavy wood, faded tapestries, and the faint, lingering scent of potpourri and decay. But it was the conservatory that truly called to me. I'd seen it from the outside, a sprawling glass addition on the manor's eastern flank, a geometric anomaly against the Gothic stone. A faint, earthy aroma, far more potent than the one outside, seeped from beneath the doors, promising something wild and untamed. I pushed the doors open. The air inside was a physical presence, thick and humid, clinging to my skin. It was a jungle, sprawling and unruly, pushing against the glass panes that formed its ceiling and walls. Plants I had never seen before twisted and coiled, their leaves a riot of unnatural greens, deep purples, and even a startling, almost metallic blue. Some bore fleshy, bulbous growths that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. Others had tendrils like grasping fingers, reaching out, brushing against the glass. The sweet, cloying smell was overpowering here, laced with something sharper, almost acrid. The sound was hypnotic, a constant, soft percussion. This wasn't just a garden, it was an ecosystem, dense and alive, yet profoundly wrong. The plants weren't merely growing, they seemed to be listening. I ran a hand over a broad, leathery leaf, feeling a strange, almost imperceptible tremor beneath my fingertips. The surface was cool, slick with moisture, and surprisingly firm. I moved deeper, navigating narrow paths choked by tangled foliage. Some of the plants had roots that had burst through their pots, snaking across the flagstone floor, disappearing into cracks in the wall. It was as if the conservatory itself was struggling to contain them. A low, soft thrum vibrated through the floor, barely audible, but persistent. Hidden amongst the verdant chaos, tucked beneath an enormous fern-like plant with fronds the color of bruised plums, I found a small, cluttered workbench. It was piled high with gardening tools, soil samples in labeled jars, and a stack of leather-bound journals. Elara's journals. My great-aunt's meticulous hand was evident even in the faint scrawl on the covers. I picked up the topmost volume, its leather cracked and dry. The pages were brittle, filled with elegant script that grew increasingly erratic as I flipped through them. Early entries detailed Latin names, soil compositions, and light requirements. Clinical, scientific. But then, a shift. The specimens respond to a specific frequency, a resonance within the earth itself. Not light, not water, but something deeper. My brow furrowed. I turned more pages. They are not inert. They communicate, not through sound, but through impression, a deep, pervasive hunger. The hairs on my arms prickled. I kept reading, the air in the conservatory growing heavier, the strange plant smells more potent. Day 147. The growth is accelerating. It demands more than nutrients. It seeks absorption. And then the terms started appearing, underlined, capitalized, almost reverent. The root. It is not singular. It is a network, a consciousness, and it extends far beyond the glass. The growth. It is the expression, the manifestation of the root's will. It mimics, it adapts, it consumes. Elara's handwriting became a frantic scrawl, almost illegible in places. It watches, it learns, it knows. A faint clink echoed from deeper within the conservatory, beyond the workbench. I froze, my gaze darting through the dense foliage. Nothing. My imagination, I told myself. The journals were unsettling me. I closed the journal, the leather cool against my palm. Elara hadn't just been a botanist. He had been a keeper, a witness. And whatever he had been tending, it was still here, its presence palpable. My eyes scanned the workbench again, and I noticed something else, almost hidden by a stack of empty terracotta pots. A heavy, iron-bound door, barely visible, set into the stone wall behind the bench. It was almost perfectly camouflaged by a thick, woody vine that had snaked its way across the stone. Its leaves the same deep purple as some of the conservatory's more unsettling inhabitants. I pushed aside the vine, revealing the door more fully. No handle, just a heavy, rusted latch. I worked it open, the metal groaning in protest. Beyond it, a narrow, unlit passage stretched into absolute blackness. The passage was rough-hewn stone, barely wide enough for my shoulders. The ceiling was low, pressing down, and the walls were slick with condensation, tiny rivulets running down their uneven surfaces. It evoked a profound sense of finality, of being sealed away. The beam of my flashlight wavered, revealing nothing but more rough stone, more dampness. The passage felt endless, yet I knew it couldn't be. The root, and I had a terrifying suspicion that I was already part of its system. Clink. It had been distinct, metallic, yet soft, like a small tool dropping onto concrete. My eyes swept the dense, shadowy foliage, past the gnarled trunks of some monstrous, unfamiliar plant Elara had nurtured, towards the far wall where the glass was grimy with condensation. Nothing moved. My imagination, I repeated, a whisper in the echoing space. The journals, with their cryptic entries about symbiosis and roots reaching deep, were getting to me. I closed the leather-bound book, the cool cover a small anchor in the rising tide of unease. Time to get out of here. I made my way out of the conservatory, the heavy wooden door groaning shut behind me. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the floorboards beneath my boots. I stopped, listening. The house was always settling, always breathing, I'd told myself. But this was a deeper hum, like a distant, massive engine vibrating somewhere deep beneath the foundation. I headed for the study, planning to put the journals away and perhaps try to find a stronger signal for my phone. As I passed the grand staircase, I noticed it. The portrait of a stern-faced ancestor, which I'd straightened just yesterday after it had inexplicably tilted, was now askew again. More so, in fact. Its heavy frame hung at a precarious angle, almost as if someone had deliberately yanked it. My brow furrowed. I hadn't touched it since. And no one else was here. I walked over, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the polished wood. I reached out to correct it, my fingers brushing the cool, ornate frame. As I did, a flicker of movement caught my eye in the dusty glass covering the portrait. Not my reflection, not quite. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving only my startled, pale reflection staring back. My hand recoiled as if burned. My chest tightened, a frantic rhythm beginning against my ribs. I stared at the portrait, then at my own trembling hand. It was just the light, the dust, the angle. My mind playing tricks. But the feeling of being watched, which had been a subtle whisper in the conservatory, now sharpened into a palpable presence. It wasn't just my imagination anymore. Every creak, every groan of old wood seemed to carry an intent, a low, drawn-out sigh. I needed to talk to someone. Anyone. I pulled out my phone. No signal. Not unusual in this remote location, but I usually got a bar or two near the study window. I tried again, walking to the window, holding the phone up like a desperate offering. Nothing. The screen remained stubbornly blank where the signal bars should be. I tried calling my colleague, then the estate lawyer. Just static, then a deadline. I checked the battery. Full. I tried the landline in the study, a relic from Elara's time. I picked up the heavy receiver. No dial tone. I slammed the receiver back into its cradle. Panic began to claw at my throat. The house felt suddenly enormous, a labyrinth with no exit. My gaze fell on an old, heavy oak door I hadn't noticed before, tucked away behind a tapestry depicting some forgotten hunting scene. It looked out of place, almost deliberately concealed. Driven by a desperate need for something different, somewhere else, I pulled at the tarnished brass handle. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, its beam weak and flickering as I stepped over the threshold. The passage was long and straight, lined with heavy, rusted iron doors on either side, each with a small, grimy viewport. This wasn't just a forgotten wing. Why was something like this in Blackwood Manor? Elara's journals hadn't mentioned anything about this. Each iron door was numbered, the paint peeling, revealing patches of rust like old wounds. As I walked, my footsteps echoing unnervingly, I noticed something else. Along the base of the walls, and even creeping up the rusted iron of the doors, were thin, fibrous tendrils. They weren't just roots. They were alive. A faint, rhythmic scratching sound started up ahead, from deeper within the corridor. It was soft, insistent, like fingernails dragging across metal, or something attempting to burrow its way out. I took a step back, then another, my heart slamming against my ribs. The air grew heavier, the sickly sweet smell intensifying, almost suffocating. Then, from behind one of the grimy viewports, a flicker, a movement. I froze, my phone beam trembling. Something waited. And I knew, with a horrifying certainty that seeped into my bones, that it wasn't just the house watching me anymore. It was something within the house, something that had been kept in this godforsaken corridor, and it was becoming aware of my presence. The scratching grew louder, more frantic. The house wasn't just closing in, it was actively reaching for me, drawing me deeper into its suffocating embrace. I turned and scrambled back, the heavy door groaning shut behind me, sealing me in with whatever horrors this manor truly held. The metallic clink echoed in the vast, humid air of the conservatory, a sound too sharp, too precise, to be dismissed as the groan of old pipes or the drip of condensation. My eyes, already strained by the dim light filtering through the grime-streaked glass, darted towards the sound's origin. The monstrous gnarled plant whose roots seemed to writhe like petrified serpents. Its foliage, a dense, almost black green, swallowed the available light, creating pockets of impenetrable shadow. I moved forward, slowly, each step a deliberate press against the damp flagstones. My breath hitched in my throat as I peered into the depths of the plant's base, where its trunk, thick as a man's torso, twisted into the earth. Nothing. I swept my gaze across the surrounding area, checking under benches laden with exotic specimens, behind hanging baskets dripping with alien-looking vines. The clink had been so distinct, so close. But there was nothing. No dropped tool, no glint of metal. Utterly, completely alone in the sprawling, breathing house. Yet the sound had been real. I retreated from the conservatory, the sickly sweet scent clinging to my clothes, the phantom clink still echoing in the silent corridors. Sleep, when it finally came, was a battlefield. I tasted soil, felt the gritty particles on my tongue, and woke up gasping, my mouth dry, a faint, earthy taste lingering. The mornings offered little respite. The dreams bled into my waking hours, subtle at first. A rustle from the corner of a room where no window was open, no draft present. The scent of that cloying sweetness, suddenly pervasive, then vanishing just as quickly, leaving me sniffing the air like a hound, questioning my own senses. I'd catch myself staring at the wallpaper, convinced the intricate patterns of leaves and vines were shifting, elongating, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. My determination, once a solid foundation, began to chip away, exposing a raw, frayed nerve. Then came the pull. It started as a vague curiosity, a feeling that there was something I needed to see, a place in the manor I hadn't yet explored, but should. It wasn't a thought, more a sensation, a low thrumming behind my ribs, guiding me. The pull grew stronger each day, like an invisible current drawing me deeper into the house's forgotten corners. The air grew heavy with the scent of stagnant water and old concrete, a stark contrast to the plant-rich air above. I found myself in a labyrinth of disused storage rooms, their shelves empty, their floors thick with dust. The pull intensified, urging me onward, through a low archway and into a corridor I recognized from the estate plans I'd briefly reviewed. The name itself sent a shiver down my spine. The corridor was narrow, lined with thick, reinforced concrete. Heavy, rust-pitted metal doors, each with a small, barred viewport, stood sentinel along its length. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from a strange, almost manic excitement. This was it. This was where the pull had been leading me. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest, echoing through the silent space. The room inside was small, concrete-lined, utterly devoid of furniture. But in the center, nestled in a shallow depression in the floor, was a single, pulsating light. It was a spore, unlike anything I had ever seen. Roughly spherical, the size of a pigeon's egg, it glowed with an internal, soft, almost ethereal bioluminescence. The light was a pale, sickly green, throbbing gently, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. It wasn't smooth. Its surface was a network of tiny, hair-thin filaments, constantly shifting, almost imperceptibly, as if breathing. The air around it hummed with that cloying, sweet scent, intensified tenfold here, making my head swim. My hand, without conscious instruction, reached out. My fingers hovered just above its surface, feeling a warmth, a vibration that resonated deep within my bones. Touch it, feel it, take it. It wasn't my thought. It was an imposition, a demand. My fingertips brushed against the spore's surface. It felt soft, yielding, like velvet moss. Yet beneath that softness, I sensed a strange, firm resilience. The green light pulsed brighter, momentarily blinding me, and a jolt, not of pain but of intense, invasive energy, shot up my arm. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the concrete room tilting precariously. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. My fingers closed around it, the warmth and vibration filling my palm. It felt utterly wrong, yet utterly necessary. I had to keep it. Its light, meant to illuminate, only seemed to emphasize the ghastly pallor of my skin, reflected in the slick, organic sheen of the corridor walls. My breath hitched, a ragged sound that snagged on the damp air. Sanity. The corridor stretched behind me, a maw of deeper shadow. It wasn't just a plant. It was a signal, a beacon from Elara's twisted legacy. I needed answers, and I knew where to find them. The journals. My legs felt like lead, but I forced one foot in front of the other. The spore's eerie glow guiding me through the labyrinthine passages. I imagined the manor itself watching, its countless eyes of knotty wood and pitted stone tracking my progress, a silent, predatory gaze. I didn't stop until I reached the library, the spore still clutched tight, its light now a faint, mocking glow against the dimness. Dust motes danced in the sudden illumination, a swirling vortex of forgotten time. The scent of old paper and dried ink filled my nostrils, a stark contrast to the cloying sweetness of the corridor. My fingers, still trembling, traced the spines of Elara's journals. I'd read snippets before, enough to know her scientific rigor, her meticulous observations. I found it, a smaller, leather-bound volume, tucked away behind a row of larger, more formal tomes. Its cover felt rough, almost leathery, as if it had been handled with obsessive frequency. I settled into the worn leather armchair, the spore placed carefully on the heavy oak table, its soft luminescence still a unnerving presence. I cracked open the journal. The first few pages were familiar, precise botanical sketches, detailed notes on soil composition and light exposure. Then the handwriting began to change. Not wind through leaves, but a resonance. Resonance? My stomach tightened. This was it, the beginning of the unraveling. June 3rd. They speak of hunger, a deep, abiding need. The root system, it calls for sustenance. Sustenance. What kind of sustenance? My mind reeled, trying to rationalize, to find a scientific explanation. Was she talking about nutrients for her plants? But the tone, it was almost reverent, fearful. July 19th. The manor is alive, not merely with the life I tend, but with its own sentience. It breathes, it waits. The entries became more erratic. The ink sometimes smeared as if Elara's hand had trembled. She spoke of offerings, of feeding the earth, of communing with the deep roots. There was no explicit mention of what these offerings entailed, but the implication, heavy and suffocating, hung in the air like a shroud. August 2nd. They showed me the network, the true extent of its reach. Blackwood is merely the heart. Its tendrils stretch, unseen, beneath the very ground we walk. It is a consciousness, ancient and patient, stirring from its long slumber. A consciousness, the idea that these plants, these organic growths, weren't just a botanical oddity, but a vast, interconnected, thinking entity. It was too much. It twisted the familiar into something monstrous. Elara's later entries were less scientific, more a desperate plea, a terrified surrender. She wrote of the plant's will, their desires, their insatiable appetite. She believed they communicated not just with her, but through her, using her as a vessel, a conduit. He was not the gardener. He was the tended. September 10th. I am merely a keeper, a facilitator. The manor hums with their song. They grow stronger. Soon they will require more, much more. And I am willing to provide. The journal slammed shut in my hands, the sudden sound echoing through the quiet library. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat. The spore on the table pulsed, its green light seeming to mock me. Elara wasn't just mad. He was ensnared, consumed by the very thing she cultivated. And now I was here, in her place. The plants weren't merely botanical specimens. They were something else entirely. Something ancient, something hungry, something sentient. And Blackwood Manor, my supposed escape, was not a house. It was its root system, its sprawling living body, waiting for its next host. My gaze drifted to the window. What? The air in the library suddenly felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. The manor was no longer just old walls and creaking floors. It was a vast, living organism, and I was trapped within its digestive tract. And now, it was reaching for me. The journal lay open on the library table, a silent accuser. Its pages, filled with Elara's frantic scrawl, had laid bare a truth far more grotesque than any madness I could have imagined. She hadn't simply cultivated a garden. He had nurtured a parasite, and now Blackwood Manor was its host. My gaze drifted to the spore, still glowing faintly on the polished wood, a malevolent emerald eye. A cold certainty settled in my gut, displacing the frantic beat of my heart. I wasn't leaving until I understood the full extent of this horror. Elara had hinted at a true core, a root system far beneath the surface. My fingers traced the faded ink on the last legible page, a rough sketch of a symbol I'd seen nowhere else in the manor, accompanied by the phrase, Where the stone weeps, the heart beats. Stone weeping. I thought of the damp, moss-covered walls in the oldest parts of the house, the cellar, the forgotten passages, but the drawing, a stylized root system descending into a geometric pattern, seemed to point specifically to the library itself, or rather, underneath it. I spent the next hour systematically examining the library. I pushed against bookshelves, tapped on paneling, ran my hands over every inch of the cold, dark wood. Not the house settling, but something more deliberate, a slight give in the wall. I pulled the book free. A small, almost invisible latch was revealed, camouflaged by a layer of dust and grime. My fingers fumbled with it, a surge of unease tightening my chest. It clicked, soft as a sigh. With a groan of ancient wood and metal, a section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a narrow vertical shaft of absolute blackness. Taking a deep breath, I retrieved my sturdy flashlight from my satchel. Its beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a rough-hewn stone staircase descending into the earth. The steps were uneven, slick with moisture. The passage twisted, narrowed, and the sense of being buried alive pressed in on me. The descent felt endless. My flashlight beam picked out a low, arched doorway. I stepped through, and the air shifted, heavy and still. This was no longer a natural cave system or a simple cellar extension. Rusting iron bars stretched across what had once been openings, now choked with cobwebs. Each step I took sent dust motes dancing in the beam, disturbed from decades of undisturbed rest. I imagined the clank of keys, the shuffle of feet, the desperate hushed breaths of those who had walked this path before me. Not quite. It was too uniform, too deliberate. As I approached, the low hum I'd been subconsciously aware of intensified, a deep, resonant thrumming that vibrated through the soles of my boots. Not earth. It was a dense, interwoven tapestry of roots, thick as my arm, pulsing with a faint, greenish luminescence. The sickly sweet aroma was overwhelming now, a fungal perfume that coated my tongue. Tendrils, thinner and more flexible, snaked out from the main mass, reaching towards me, or so it seemed. They were covered in strange, bulbous growths, like grotesque fungi, some of them weeping a viscous, clear fluid that shimmered in my light. The wall of roots opened into a cavernous space. My flashlight couldn't reach the ceiling, but it illuminated a vast, sprawling network that filled the chamber. Roots, thick as ancient tree trunks, crisscrossed the space, forming arches and columns. They pulsed with that internal green light, casting an ethereal, unsettling glow. A low, rhythmic throb echoed through the cavern, a slow, powerful heartbeat. This was it, the true heart of Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just roots. It was a living, breathing entity, vast and ancient, its tendrils woven into the very foundations of the estate. I wasn't just in a hidden chamber beneath an old house. I was inside something monstrous, something that had consumed the manor whole and was now reaching out, silent and hungry, for me. My garden, my sanity. The words from Elara's journal blurred, the ink bleeding into the cheap paper, or perhaps it was my vision that wavered. Blackwood Manor was its host, and I, its unwitting inheritor, was now... what? A new gardener? A new host? A tremor ran through the library floor, not an earthquake, but something deeper, more resonant. My stomach churned, a cold knot tightening within me. I tried to push away from the table, but my limbs felt heavy, weighted down by an unseen force. The ornate wallpaper, with its faded floral patterns, seemed to ripple and writhe. The roses on the paper curled inwards, their petals tightening into grasping claws, their stems elongating, reaching. I blinked hard, rubbing at my eyes, but the illusion persisted, a shimmering distortion at the edges of my sight. "No," I whispered. the sound swallowed by the suddenly expansive silence of the room. Not real. But it felt real. Too real. Since the accident. Her face, pale and still. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish it, but the manor seemed to feed on the sorrow, twisting it, replaying it with a sickening clarity. This wasn't just my grief. It was theirs. It was hers. Elara's grief, the root's hunger, my own despair, all swirling into a grotesque hallucinatory vortex. The pull intensified, a deep, insistent thrum that resonated in my chest, drawing me further into the house's labyrinthine depths. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was an undeniable magnetic force, a craving for answers I knew would only bring more horror. I needed to understand what Elara had done, what he had become. My determination, though shaken, still held a stubborn core. I wouldn't be another victim, not without a fight. The corridor ended at a heavy iron-bound door, almost swallowed by a thick curtain of ivy that pulsed with a faint, sickly green luminescence. With a final, desperate tug, I ripped a section free, revealing the door's surface. It was metal, rusted and corroded, but clearly man-made. Death Row? Here? Deep beneath Blackwood Manor? My mind raced, trying to reconcile the elegant, if decaying, architecture above with this brutal, almost industrial inscription. What had Elara been doing down here? What had she tried to close off? I pushed against the door. No light penetrated its depths. Each cell door was a solid slab of metal, bolted shut, scarred with deep gouges as if something had tried to claw its way out. Or in. They weren't just mournful now. They were accusatory, demanding, promising. They spoke of her again, my lost love. Her final moments, twisting the images, making them sharper, more painful. They offered solace, a reunion, if only I would. Let go. The floor beneath my feet felt strangely soft, spongy. I lowered the flashlight. It was the root. It was here, in its most concentrated form. A vision exploded behind my eyes. Not just fragments of the accident, but her face, smiling, then screaming, then gone. But this time, her eyes weren't empty. The horror was so profound, so utterly personal, that it stole the air from my lungs. And it was offering me a way back, a twisted reunion, if I would only surrender. My determination wavered, almost collapsing under the weight of this insidious comfort. The root wanted me, not just as a host, but as a part of itself, a new conduit, a new consciousness to add to its vast suffering collective. I stumbled back, tripping over a particularly thick root, my flashlight clattering to the floor, its beams spinning wildly, illuminating the horror in fragmented flashes. The walls of the corridor were no longer concrete. They were a living, breathing tapestry of knotted roots, pulsating with that sickly green light. My mind reeled, the line between memory and hallucination, between sanity and utter madness, dissolving into a sickening blur. The root was in me, or I was in it. The sense of belonging was terrifying, yet undeniably seductive. I felt its vast ancient consciousness brushing against mine, a multitude of forgotten lives, of Elara's final desperate thoughts, all swirling together. It wanted me to join. I clawed at my chest, a desperate, futile gesture against the insidious tendrils that were already weaving their way into the deepest corners of my mind. The horror of the corridor, the echoes of forgotten pain, were becoming my own. And the thought, terrifyingly, felt almost right. The whispers from the walls grew, a low, guttural murmur that pressed in on me, not distinct words, but a collective hum of something ancient and hungry. This couldn't be happening. I couldn't be happening. The connection, the tendrils I felt reaching into my own consciousness, they were getting stronger, tighter. The thought clawed at me, raw and desperate. The conservatory. It was the heart, the nerve center of Elara's peculiar obsession, the place where the unnatural growth pulsed with the most virulent life. If I could destroy that, perhaps I could break free. It was a fool's errand, I knew, but sanity was slipping through my fingers like fine sand, and desperation was all I had left. I found an old, heavy-bladed axe in the dusty toolshed, the kind a groundskeeper would use for clearing stubborn roots. The handle felt rough and solid in my grip, a small anchor in a sea of unreality. Tendrils thicker than my arm snaked across the floor, up the walls, even across the ceiling, pressing against the ancient panes. "No," I rasped, my voice hoarse. "Not anymore." I raised the axe, the metal glinting. With a primal roar that tore from my own throat, I brought it down, aiming for the thickest, most prominent vine coiling around a crumbling stone pedestal. The blade bit deep, not into wood or fiber, but into something tough and fibrous, like gristle. And then the conservatory screamed. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, not entirely. It was a screech that tore through my skull, 1,000 needles of pure agony piercing my brain. The plants reacted with startling speed. The tendrils on the floor whipped and lashed like angry snakes. Thorns, previously dormant, erupted from stems, long and needle-sharp, reaching for me. The air grew impossibly heavy, pressing down, making it hard to breathe. I swung again, a frantic, desperate attack. The axe struck another vine, and this time, the entire wall seemed to convulse. Glass panes in the roof above me shrieked, spiderweb cracks spreading rapidly across their surface. One pane, directly overhead, shattered with a deafening crash, showering me with slivers of cold glass. I cried out, more from shock than pain, shielding my face with my arm. But the assault was just beginning. I saw her face, my lost partner, pale and still, her eyes accusing. These weren't just memories. They were vivid, tangible hallucinations pressing in on me, making my knees buckle. "Get out!" I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the manor's growing roar. A massive root, thick as a tree trunk, erupted from the floor near the shattered pedestal, lashing out like a monstrous tentacle. It slammed into my side, sending me flying across the humid floor. Pain exploded in my ribs, a sharp, searing agony that stole my breath. Then the floor beneath me began to shift. The ancient flagstones groaned, tilting precariously. I scrambled, trying to push myself up, but my injured side screamed in protest. The floor gave way entirely, not with a sudden collapse, but a slow, grinding descent, like a trapdoor opening into a nightmare. My head spun. I pushed myself up, my hands scraping against rough-hewn stone. My eyes, adjusting to the gloom, made out a long, narrow passage. Overhead, a low, vaulted ceiling dripped with condensation. A single ancient iron grate, rusted solid, was set into one wall, letting in a sliver of weak, distant light. This wasn't a basement. I dragged myself forward, my hand pressed against my throbbing ribs. The air smelled of old iron, stagnant water, and a faint, unsettling tang of something organic, something that shouldn't belong in such a sterile, brutal place. Then I saw it. Death Row? Here? In Blackwood Manor? This wasn't some forgotten cellar. And as I looked closer, my eyes strained in the gloom. I saw them. Faint, almost imperceptible veins of sickly green, tracing lines along the mortar between the stone blocks. Fine, hair-thin filaments, like the roots of a monstrous plant, had infiltrated even this place. They glowed with the same faint, pulsing light I'd seen in the conservatory. The entity wasn't just in the gardens or the main house. It had burrowed deep, its roots reaching into the very foundations of the estate, into the history of its suffering. It had absorbed the despair, the fear, the finality, feeding on it, making it its own. A sharp, searing pain shot through my leg. I looked down, my breath catching in my throat. You always were. I struggled, but the root held fast, its grip like iron. The pain in my ribs flared, and my head slammed against the stone wall. I was trapped, injured, and the manor, the entity, had found a new, horrifying way to bind me to its ancient, hungry heart. The darkness that had been closing in wasn't an absence of light, but a physical weight, pressing down, suffocating. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent drum against the rough stone. The root that had seized me didn't crush. It simply held, a vice of living wood, its grip unyielding. I hung there, suspended, my ribs screaming with every ragged breath. I fought against it, a desperate flailing struggle, but it was like trying to wrestle a redwood. My vision swam, not from lack of oxygen, but from the sheer, overwhelming presence of the thing that bound me. It was consuming, not just my body, but my very essence, a silent, insidious invasion. Then, just as the blackness threatened to swallow me whole, the pressure eased, ever so slightly. The root didn't release me, but it shifted, pulling me not into itself, but alongside it. I was dragged, scraping against cold, damp stone through a narrow archway, deeper into the manor's forgotten depths. When the movement finally ceased, I found myself propped against a wall, the root still coiled around my torso, pinning me. My head lolled, and I blinked, trying to clear the haze from my eyes. My gaze slowly took in my surroundings. The stone walls were slick with condensation, weeping slow, steady trails. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water and my own shallow, rasping breaths. This place felt like a tomb. A faint glint of something caught my eye, near my outstretched hand. It was a small, leather-bound book, half hidden beneath a tangle of thinner root tendrils that snaked across the floor. Elara's journal. It must have fallen from my pocket during the struggle. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for it. The root around me remained taut, but didn't prevent my reach. It almost felt deliberate, as if it had guided me here. With a grunt of pain, I managed to pull the journal free. It was open, pages stained and buckled to the very last entry. The handwriting, Elara's elegant, looping script, was erratic here, spidery, almost frantic. My eyes struggled to focus in the dim, flickering light, but I forced them to read. It demands, it craves, not destruction as the ignorant would assume, but communion. A shedding of the fragile husk, a return to the primeval embrace. My purpose finally revealed. My garden has grown beyond all expectation, beyond even my wildest dreams. It has become a consciousness, a hungry, benevolent will, and I, its humble gardener, am to be its ultimate bloom. My breath hitched. My fingers tightened on the damp paper. Benevolent? There was nothing benevolent about the crushing grip around my chest, the way the manor had tried to swallow me whole. I read on, the words chilling me more than the cold stone beneath my cheek. The ritual, simple yet profound, to offer oneself willingly, to allow the tendrils to seek out the core, to intertwine, to merge. It is not death, but transcendence. The pain is fleeting, a mere cleansing fire. What remains is a unity, a perfect symbiosis, and in return, I shall truly live forever within the heart of Blackwood. Blake, my dear Blake, you will understand. You will accept. It is the only way for the garden to truly flourish, the only way to survive its hunger, to become one, to become everything. The journal slipped from my grasp, falling with a soft thud onto the stone. The words echoed in my head, a horrifying revelation. Elara wasn't a victim, dragged unwillingly into the manor's clutches. He had chosen this. He had embraced it, twisted her own reality into a grotesque act of devotion. Her final entry wasn't a desperate plea for help, but a mad testament, a guide for me. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a sensation that resonated deep in my bones, a silent, pervasive hum that spoke of ancient power and insatiable hunger. It was the manor, speaking to me through Elara's words, through the root's unyielding embrace. The choice, stark and terrible, lay before me. Succumb. Allow the root to consume me, to become another nutrient in its vast subterranean network, my consciousness dissolving into its collective mind. Or fight. Find some desperate, impossible means of escape, even if it meant tearing myself free from its grip. A futile struggle against an entity that had already claimed my great-aunt, and now demanded me. And I was the next inmate. The journal lay on the cold stone, a silent accusation. My great-aunt Elara, not a victim, but a willing participant, a devotee. The realization ripped through me, a fresh, raw wound on top of old scars. My breath hitched, a desperate, ragged sound in the profound quiet. This wasn't just a house. It was a hungry, breathing maw, and Elara had thrown herself into its gaping maw. The thought curdled in my gut, turning my fear into a cold, hard resolve. I wouldn't be like her. I wouldn't. I snatched up the journal, my fingers brushing against the brittle pages. I had to go deeper. If Elara had embraced this horror, there had to be a core, a heart to this sprawling, insidious organism she called her garden. A place where her devotion had finally bloomed. My gaze fell upon a sketch in the journal, a crude map of a sub-basement, labeled in Elara's spidery hand, the root's chamber. Beneath it, here? What unspeakable history did this house truly hold? The thought was a lead weight in my stomach, yet I couldn't look away. This was it. The source. The grand staircase, once a symbol of faded elegance, now felt like a skeletal spine, each creak and groan a living sound. The air grew thicker with the cloying sweetness, a smell like overripe fruit and something metallic, like old blood. The walls pulsed faintly, a subtle, almost imperceptible throb that I now recognized as the manor's heartbeat. I descended into the deepest parts of the cellar, past the wine racks draped in fungal filaments, past the root cellars choked with tendrils thicker than my arm. The light from my phone cut a stark path through the gloom, illuminating the grotesque beauty of the organic growths. They weren't just on the walls. They were the walls, rippling and twisting, their surfaces slick with moisture. The temperature plummeted. Beyond it, the air was stiller, colder, and the silence was absolute. A heavy blanket that pressed against my eardrums. The corridor stretched before me, a tunnel of absolute blackness. My phone beam danced, revealing walls of rough-hewn stone, wet and glistening. But it wasn't just water. The growths here were different, more aggressive, forming grotesque, fleshy tubes that snaked across the ceiling and down the walls, pulsating with a faint internal light. It was like walking through the arteries of a colossal, diseased heart. My lungs burned with each shallow breath. It wasn't a sound from outside. It was coming from within the walls, from the very core of this place. I rounded a final bend, and the corridor opened into a chamber. It wasn't a tree, not truly. It was a monstrous amalgamation of wood and flesh, a pillar of twisted, gnarled tendrils that writhed slowly, almost imperceptibly. A low, resonant hum emanated from it, a sound that bypassed my ears and went straight into my bones, vibrating through my very essence. And then I saw her. Embedded within the root, her form distorted, her face a mask of serene horror, was Elara. Her eyes, open and unblinking, were fixed on me, but there was no recognition, only an ancient, deep-seated hunger. He was not merely absorbed, he was part of it. Her consciousness woven into the collective awareness of the root. He was a silent, living sacrifice. A voice, not heard, but felt, whispered in my mind, a chorus of echoes, ancient and new. "Welcome, Blake. We have been waiting." It wasn't hostile, not directly. It was inviting, alluring. It wanted to consume me, not to destroy, but to integrate. This was the true nature of Elara's devotion. Not to serve, but to merge. To become the manor. My hand tightened around the heavy wrench I'd grabbed from the toolkit in the cellar. It was a pathetic weapon against an entity that thought in millennia, but it was all I had. The hum intensified, a low thrum that threatened to crack my skull. My resolve wavered, tempted by the promise of oblivion, of an end to the ceaseless ache of my grief. But then I saw Elara's eyes again, fixed and vacant, and the horror of her choice galvanized me. This wasn't peace. This was an ultimate erasure. I wouldn't succumb. I swung the wrench with all my might, a desperate, futile act against an ancient evil. The impact was sickeningly soft, a wet thud that vibrated up my arm. A collective shriek, a sound that was both 1,000 voices and no voice at all, tore through the chamber, rattling the very stone. The root convulsed, its fleshy eyes snapping open, a wave of pure, concentrated agony washing over me. It wasn't enough. I knew it. The root was too vast, too deeply rooted. I had merely nicked its surface, but the attack had broken the psychic hold, if only for a moment. I stumbled back, gasping, the sap burning where it had splattered on my skin. The manor was fighting back. Each step was a battle against the rising tide of fear and the manor's vengeful wrath. I pushed past the iron-banded door, up the cellar steps, my lungs screaming for air. The entire house groaned around me, a symphony of creaks and groans, of snapping wood and dripping fluids. I didn't stop until I burst through the front door, gasping, collapsing onto the rain-slicked porch. It pulsed, a faint, sickly glow emanating from its deepest windows. It was alive, and it was still hungry. I had escaped. But as I stumbled away from the manor, my legs weak, my mind reeling, I felt a faint, insidious thrumming deep within my own body. A vibration that resonated with the memory of the root's hum. A strange, earthy aroma clung to my skin, and the taste of something metallic, something like the sap, coated my tongue. The horror had endured. It hadn't consumed me, not entirely, but it had left its mark. A piece of Blackwood Manor, a fragment of the root, now resided within me, a silent, growing seed. I was free, but irrevocably changed, forever bound to the house's enduring evil. And Blackwood Manor, its ancient, hungry heart still beating, waited for its next inheritor, its next willing devotee. The cycle, unbroken, continued.